Good day, everyone. We are the Group 2 here to report about the ocean and fisheries. Now, this discussion will introduce us as to how the ocean affects humans and how us humans affect the ocean and marine life. Furthermore, we'll tackle about the patterns of circulation in the ocean, major ocean life zones, and the human impacts on the ocean. Now let's start off with our country, the Philippines. The Philippines uses fishes as a natural resource for income and food. Many Filipinos work as fishermen all the way from the waters of Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. In General Santos City, we have our tuna capital. In Dagupan City po na ato ang bangus capital. And in Cebu City, we have our Danggit capital. Our fishing capital of the Philippines, we have Napota City. And kung ganahan mo og seafoods, na ata sa Roa City, specifically in the province of Capiz. It is our seafood capital. Now, our ocean is very rich. However, it can only provide as much. It needs to recover in order for it to continue to provide for our needs. One of man's abuses worth mentioning is overfishing. This means that harvesting fishes faster than they can reproduce. We already have reports of overfishing in the Mediterranean for bluefin tuna, and it was already documented. There were already conservation efforts way back in 2011 to regulate the bluefin tuna's dwindling number. Worldwide, it is estimated that 80% of the species, of the fish species, have been overfished. In the US alone, the fish stock is depleted by 95% because of increasing demand. Ecologists and economists estimate that if overfishing and ocean pollution is not remedied or resolved, all population of harvested fishes could collapse by year 2048. Now let's move on to the patterns of circulation in the ocean. Water in the ocean dominates Earth and it covers about three-fourths of the ocean's surface. The ocean is the home to many animals from giants like whales and little ones like planktons. It is essential for Earth's hydrologic cycle, which provides us with water and also influences climate and weather. Our objectives for this discussion is for us to describe the global ocean and its significance to life on Earth, discuss the roles of the winds and the Coriolis effect in producing global water flow patterns, including gyres, and define El Nino and La Nina and describe some of their effects. Now, what are gyres? These are large circular ocean current systems that often encompass an entire ocean basin. These are generated by persistent prevailing winds blowing over the ocean. Now, in this picture, we can see the basic pattern of ocean currents. Move na ko ako nawong para makita. So we can see a clockwise pattern in the northern hemisphere and a counterclockwise pattern in the southern hemisphere. Now, what is this Coriolis effect? It is the result of Earth's rotation on weather patterns and ocean currents. Earth's rotation from west to east causes surface ocean currents to swerve to the right in the northern hemisphere, helping establish the circular clockwise pattern of water currents. Also, in the southern hemisphere, ocean currents swerve to the left, thereby moving in a circular counterclockwise pattern. Now, we mentioned about Coriolis effect. It will have an impact on the Great Ocean Current, or what you can see in the picture right here. Now, deep ocean currents are affected by seawater density. Density increases as temperature decreases. This makes cold water saltier and colder water flows under warmer water. Now, the Coriolis effect, nga itong mentioned kanina, has greater influence in deep ocean currents. The picture shows ocean conveyor belt. So you can see this great conveyor belt. What is this great conveyor belt? This represents the global circulation of shallow or the warm, less water and the deep or the cold, saltier current. The ocean conveyor belt affects regional and global climate.
So, wind from the atmosphere affect ocean currents, and heat from the ocean affect atmospheric circulation. So, two of the most common of these interaction between the atmosphere and the ocean are El Nino Southern Oscillation or ENSO and La Nina phenomena. So El Nino and La Nina are opposite phases of what is known as El Nino Southern Oscillation cycle. So the ENSO cycle is a scientific term that describes the ocean and atmosphere in the east central equatorial Pacific. La Nina, on the other hand, is sometimes referred to as the cold phase of ENSO, and El Nino as the warm phase of the ENSO. So these deviations from normal surface temperature can have large-scale impacts not only on ocean processes but also on global and weather um, climate. So El Nino and La Nina episodes typically last 9 to 12 months, but sometimes prolonged events may last for years. So El Nino and La Nina events occur on average every 2 to 7 years. So typically El Nino occurs more frequently than La Nina. So we have here the El Nino condition. So um, in Spanish, El Niño means the little boy or Christ child. So El Niño was originally recognized by fishermen off the coast of Southern America in the 1600s with the appearance of unusually warm water in the Pacific Ocean. So the name was chosen based on the time of the year, which is around December, during which these warm waters events tended to occur. So El Nino refers to the large-scale ocean-atmosphere climate interaction linked to a periodic warming in sea surface temperatures across the central and east central equatorial Pacific. So the effects of El Nino are likely to develop over North America during the upcoming winter season. So those include warmer than average temperatures over western and central Canada and over the western and northern United States. So wetter than average conditions are likely over portions of the US Gulf Coast and Florida, while the drier and average conditions can be expected in the Ohio Valley and the Pacific Northwest. So the presence of El Nino can significantly influence weather patterns, ocean conditions, and marine fisheries across large portions of the globe for an extended period of time. So La Nina, on the other hand, um, in Spanish it is um, little girl. It means little girl in Spanish. So it is also sometimes called El Viejo or anti-El Nino or simply a cold event. So La Nina episodes represents periods of below average sea surface temperatures across the east central equatorial Pacific. So global climate La Nina impacts tend to be opposite those of El Nino impacts. So in the tropics, ocean temperature variations in La Nina also tend to be opposite those of El Nino. So during a La Nina year, winter temperatures are warmer than normal in the southeast and cooler than normal in the northwest.
So at this point, let's discuss about the different marine ocean life zones. So scientists have found it useful to divide the marine environment into zones or areas with homogeneous physical features. This is important in order to understand how organisms live, behave, and adapt to the different environments in the ocean. Basically, there are three major ocean life zones. These are the littoral zone, kaning near the shore, the pelagic zone, kaning blue areas, and the benthic zone, kaning grayish or brownish nga area. So let's discuss them one by one. First, let's start with the littoral zone. So the littoral zone or near shore zone is the part of the sea, lake, or river that is close to the shore. In coastal environment, the littoral zone extends from the high water mark, which is rarely submerged, to shoreline areas that are permanently submerged, meaning that it is the band of coast alternately covered and uncovered by tidal action. So kaning littoral zone mo ni siya nga area sa ocean nga near sa shore, like this one. Basically, some areas sa littoral zone is submerged with water during high tide and it is not submerged during low tide. So naay three ka-areas ang littoral zone. These are the supralittoral zone, the intertidal zone, and the sublittoral zone. First, let's talk about the supralittoral zone. So ang supralittoral zone is also known as the splash zone or the supratidal zone. Muna siyang area located between the high tide line and the dry land that is regularly splashed but not submerged by ocean water. So it is not technically part of the ocean bottom. So basically, kaning supratidal zone, kay mo ni siya nga area ang dili maabot sa high tide. So kung mag high tide dili ra siya ma-submerged uh, by water. However, kani siya nga area is moist or wet because mabasa siya tungod sa splash sa mga waves. So, it is covered by water only during storms, so seawater penetrates these elevated areas during storms, especially kung mag-storm surge, so ayara siya ma-submerged into water. So, organisms in the supralittoral zones must cope also with exposure to air, fresh water, kung mag-ulan, cold, heat, and predation by land animals and seabirds. At the top of this area, patches of dark liches, like this, can also be found sa mga rocks. Also, types of periwinkle, limpet, and neritidae are commonly inhabit the supralittoral zones like mga shells. So next is the intertidal zone. So unsa man ang intertidal zone? The intertidal zone, also known as the foreshore or seashore, is the area above water level at low tide and underwater at high tide. Or in other words, it is the area within the tidal range. So man siya intertidal zone. It is submerged with water only during high tide, then dili na pud siya ma-submerged with water during low tide. So it is alternately exposed and submerged once or twice daily. Organisms living here must be able to withstand the varying conditions of temperature, light, and salinity because of the changing environment. So organisms in the intertidal zones are adapted to an environment of harsh extremes. Water is available regularly with the tides but varies from fresh water with rain to highly saline. So kung mag-ulan man good, then low tide, so wala siya na-expose with water, so ang environment is ma-expose sa rainwater, which is low in salinity. But kung ma-submerge na po siya balik during high tide, so mataas na po iyang salinity. With the intertidal zone's high exposure to sunlight, the temperature can range from very hot with full sunshine to near freezing in colder climates. Organisms thrive in this zone are mga sea stars, sea urchins, mga mussels, hermit crab, and many species of corals. Okay, now let's proceed to the sublittoral zone. So, unsa man ang sublittoral zone? The sublittoral zone is always underwater and is below the low tide line. This zone extends all the way to where the continental shelf drops off into the abyssal plain. So, kaning sublittoral zone, muna siya nga area ang always submerged by water regardless kung high tide or low tide. In marine biology, the sublittoral zone refers to the areas where sunlight reaches the ocean floor. That is where the water is never so deep, so dili ra kay siya lalom as to take out of the photic zone. So, later, makabala mo sa ning photic zone. So, this results in high primary production and makes the sublittoral zone the location of the majority of sea life. So, red and brown algae are characteristic of this area. Typical animals include sea anemones, the coral on rocky shores, shrimps, crabs, and flounders on sandy shores. So temperature, water, and the amount of sunlight remain fairly constant because always submerged sa water. That is why organisms like sublittoral corals do not have to deal with as much change as the intertidal corals. Since kaning intertidal corals, magdeal sila change kay, di ba, submerged sila only during high tide. Then kung mag-low tide, dili sila submerged with water. So, mag-vary ang ilang environment. So, mananata sa littoral zone. Now, let's proceed to the next major ocean life zone, which is the pelagic zone. So, the pelagic zone is derived from the ancient Greek word pelagus, which means open sea. The pelagic zone consists of water column of the open ocean and can be further divided into regions by depth. So, base iyang kalalumon. So, muna siya ang epipelagic, the mesopelagic, the bathypelagic, the abyssopelagic, and the hadopelagic. The pelagic zone can be thought in terms of an imaginary cylinder or water column that goes from the surface of the sea down to the bottom. So, kada areas or kada kalalumon niya kay mag-vary ang iyang condition sa water because as the column change with depth, ang pressure maga-increase. Also, the temperature and the amount of light decreases, and the salinity and the amount of dissolved oxygen as well as micronutrients such as iron, magnesium, and calcium ay also change depende sa kalalumon sa water. So the pelagic zone is classified into two areas, the photic zone and the aphotic zone. So let's start discuss what is photic zone. So ang photic zone kay gitawag pud ni siya sunlight zone kay mo ni siya ang uppermost layer sa pelagic zone nga naga-receive og sunlight. Since reach man siya og sunlight kanina area, nag-allow niya ang phytoplankton to perform photosynthesis. So it undergoes a series of physical, chemical, and biological processes that supply nutrients into the upper water column. The photic zone is home to the majority of aquatic life due to its location. Og due pud siyang condition since sunlight man siya, exposure sa sunlight, so ang mga organisms there like mga plants kay maka-perform og photosynthesis which is a primary producer sa food chain. So the regions in the pelagic zone under the photic zones are only two, the epipelagic zone and the mesopelagic zones. So epipelagic zone. So gitawag po ni siya nga sunlight. So the epipelagic zone or the open ocean mo ni siya is the part of the ocean where there is enough sunlight for algae to utilize photosynthesis. Generally speaking, this zone reaches from the sea surface down to approximately 200 meters or 650 feet. So, mura na siya iyahang kalalumon. Nearly all primary production in the oceans occurs here because lagi kay abundant siya sa sunlight. Consequently, plants and animals are largely concentrated in this zone. Example of organisms living in this zone are plankton, floating seaweed, jellyfish, tuna, many sharks, and dolphins. So ang next zone is the mesopelagic zone, aka twilight. So gitawag po ni siya nga twilight zone. It is part of the pelagic zone that lies between the photic epipelagic zone and the aphotic bathypelagic zones, begins at a depth where only 1% of incident light reaches and ends where there is no light. The depth of these zones are between approximately 200 to 1,000 meters. So unlike the epipelagic zone, kaning mesopelagic zone is naadya po siya light pero gamay ra siya. Like twilight. Imagine mo sa light sa twilight. So the most abundant organisms thriving into the mesopelagic zone are heterotrophic bacteria. Example of animals that live here are organisms adapted to live in a low light environment like swordfish, some species of squid, wolffish, and some species of cuttlefish. Many organisms that live in this zone are bioluminescent. Some creatures living in the mesopelagic zone rise to the epipelagic zone at night to feed.
Now let's proceed to the second classification of the pelagic zone, which is the aphotic zone. So aphotic means without light. It is the permanently dark layer of seawater beneath the photic zone. The vast bulk of the ocean is never brightened by sunlight. In fact, light produced by bioluminescent organisms is more abundant than sunlight. So these are the three regions under the aphotic zone. The first is the bathypelagic zone, the second is the abyssopelagic zone, and the third is the hadopelagic zone. So this is the bathypelagic zone. This is also known as the midnight zone or the dark zone. So the bathypelagic zone is from 1,000 to 4,000 meters and completely dark. Bioluminescent organisms, some of the strangest marine creatures of the deep, live here. Plants are non-existent in this zone. Animals that can live here survive on the dead material or detritus that falls from the surface zones on other animals that live in the deep sea. The giant squid is a resident of the bathypelagic zone and serves as food source for deep diving sperm whales. The next zone is the abyssopelagic zone. This is also known as the abyss. It extends from 4,000 meters to 6,000 meters. The water temperature is near freezing and there is no light at all. Most animals in the abyssopelagic zone are blind and colorless due to the complete lack of light. The name abyssopelagic comes from the Greek meaning bottomless abyss, in times where it was thought that the deep ocean never ended. The last zone is the hadopelagic zone. So this is the zone. So the hadopelagic is from the Greek word for Hades, or the Greek underworld. This layer extends from 6,000 meters to the bottom of the deepest parts of the ocean. These areas are mostly found in deep water trenches and canyons. The deepest point in the ocean is located in the Mariana Trench off the coast of Japan at 10,911 meters. The temperature of the water is just above freezing and the pressure is an incredible 8 tons per square inch. In spite of the pressure and temperature, life can still be found here. Invertebrates such as starfish and tube worms can thrive at these depths. Now let's proceed to the benthic environment. So this is the benthic environment. So this the slopey area. So this environment covers the seabed on the slopes and down to the great depths. So this is the first part of the benthic environment, which is the bathyal zone. It is the steep descent of the seabed from the continental shelf to the abyssal zone. The next is the abyssal zone. So the ocean between about 4,000 and 5,000 meters deep. It is also known as the deep sea floor or the abyssal plain. So ang kuan ana since mas mas dili siya slope na area compared sa bathyal o sa hadal. So murag na siya pagka plain lang na feature. The last is the hadal zone. This zone is the deepest seabed of all, below a depth of 5,000 meters. The ocean floor is not all flat but has submarine ridges and deep ocean trenches known as the hadal zone. So, mo ni siya.
Human impacts on the ocean. The ocean is so vast, yet human activities could still harm it. Certain destructive human activities have a negative effect on the ocean. Human practices that impact the ocean. Improper fisheries and aquaculture, marine shipping and marine pollution, coastal development, offshore mining, and global climate change all contribute to the degradation of marine environments. What human activities have negative impact on the ocean? Examples include habitat destruction, noise pollution, plastic pollution, chemical pollution, oil spills, carbon emissions, deep sea mining, deoxygenation, surface runoff, destructive fishing, and overfishing. Pollution. One of the great paradoxes of human civilization is that the same ocean that provides food to a hungry world is used as a dumping ground. Pollution comes in forms of chemical pollution, oil spills, plastic pollution, and offshore mining. Coastal and marine ecosystems receive pollution from land, from rivers emptying to the ocean, and from atmospheric contaminants that enter the ocean via precipitation. Pollution increasingly threatens the world's fisheries. The World Resources Institute estimates that about 80% of global ocean pollution comes from human activities on land. Resources. Examples are overfishing and destructive fishing. Resources in the ocean are more susceptible to overuse and degradation than land resources, which individual nations own and for which they feel responsible, as no nation has legal claim to the open ocean. The most serious problem for marine fisheries is that many species have been harvested to the point that their numbers are severely depleted. In many areas, factory fishing has destroyed local fish stocks, leaving too few adults to breed for the future. Other activities that impact the ocean negatively. Industrial exploitations include development of resorts, cities, industries, and agriculture along coasts. It alters or destroys many coastal ecosystems, including mangrove forests, salt marshes, seagrass beds, and coral reefs. Offshore mining of reserves of oil and minerals such as manganese. Obtaining oil and gas resources from the seafloor generally poses a threat to fishing. Lastly, global warming. As the Earth's climate warms, the water also warms melting sea ice. This warming could make the water less cold and less likely to sink. Without sinking cold water, the ocean currents could slow down or stop in some places. So global warming could possibly affect the movements of the ocean conveyor belt. A quote from Robert Swan. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. So it is not yet too late. We could save our planet, we could save our ocean, our environment to see our future. That is all. Thank you.